Today's message is continuation in the Exodus series, and we're still in Exodus chapters 3 and 4, and this time it's just one verse. It's the very first verse of Exodus chapter 3. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro's father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And today's message is lessons that Moses learned from shepherding the flock. The two words that are used here are tending and led the flock. And we want to learn and think about the lessons that Moses learned looking after his father-in-law's sheep that were to help him and prepare him to be a leader of God's people. And really there are four main points. The first thing Moses learned was patient care for the weak and wandering. We all know that sheep are defenseless creatures. They're easily led, they're led astray, and of course that was to Moses, as he cared for the physical sheep, was learning the skills that he would needed to be a leader of God's people. The second thing was he had to protect them from danger. Sheep are vulnerable to predators that will come in and harm the sheep. The third thing was humility and dependence upon God, thinking of the role of shepherding in general life. And then the fourth thing was hearing God's voice and obeying. So those are the four things that we want to focus on from Exodus chapter 3. So the first thing was patient care and for the weak and the wandering. Shepherding taught Moses to care for every sheep, including the weak, the stubborn and straying. This prepared him to lead Israel with patience while they complained, doubted and rebelled. Particularly we see this in the book of Numbers. It's a book of not just the number of the people, but the murmuring of the people. Like sheep, the people of Israel constantly wandered in their hearts. Like the roots of the murmuring started actually in the book of Exodus, in the earlier chapters of the book. And Moses learned to endure and guide patiently. Numbers 11, verses 11 to 12. Why have you afflicted your servant? Did I conceive all these people, that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom? Of course, there we see Moses' patience was stretched. But shepherding prepared him for the gentle, enduring care that Moses did show to God's people. The second thing was protecting from danger. A shepherd guards from the flock from predators. Moses learned courage and vigilance, qualities necessary to confront Pharaoh and defend Israel from their enemies. Exodus chapter 3 verse 10, Come now therefore I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. This was going to be God's reply to Moses. Moses would later protect Israel from Pharaoh's army. Exodus chapter 14, you remember the awesome scene, and probably it was a night scene, as they stood with the gigantic mountain of the Red Sea in front of them and the Egyptians behind them. And then of course God spoke to Moses, hold up the staff, and God, in the words of the song, made a path through the sea. And then Exodus chapter 17, Moses will protect Israel from Amalek. You remember this was a mountain scene. Moses went up the mount and he held up his hands. Joshua was down in the valley battling, and when Moses held up his hands, Israel prevailed, and when he let them down, Amalek prevailed. But then of course Aaron and Hur gave that important role of supporting in order for Israel to get the victory. This parallels David, another shepherd. He also chose David, his servant, to shepherd Jacob, his people. Shepherds defend the flock, and Moses learned to defend God's people. The third point was humility and dependence upon God. Shepherding was a low, humble work for a former prince of Egypt. Remember Hebrews chapter 11 said he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. God used the wilderness to strip Moses of pride and teach him humble dependence. Humility made Moses a leader who later on relied on God rather than position and power. In Numbers chapter 12, God highlights Moses' humility. Now the man Moses was very humble, more than all men who are on the face of the earth. Shepherding taught him quiet obedience and not self-promotion. And the last of the 4 points was Moses learned to hear God's voice and obey. Being a shepherd placed Moses in solitude, quiet enough to hear God. God revealed himself to Moses in the wilderness while he was tending the sheep. Exodus 3 verse 4, the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, and God called to him and said, "Here I am." Shepherding trained Moses to pay attention, to stop when God speaks, and respond faithfully. And of course they're all challenging, but this particular one I think they're all applicable, but this one I think is particularly relevant to today. Do we listen for God's voice? Do we pay attention to what God is saying through his word? Do we actually stop and think about our lives when God speaks, and do we respond faithfully to God's voice in his word? And these 3 things, paying attention, stopping when God speaks, and responding faithfully, became essential for guiding Israel through the wilderness based on God's direct instruction. You remember in the book of Numbers chapter 9, with this we'll finish. Numbers chapter 9, on the day, verse 15, the tabernacle, the tent of the covenant law was set up, the cloud covered it. From evening till morning, the cloud above the tabernacle looked like fire. This is how it continued to be. The cloud covered it, and at night it looked like fire. Verse 17, whenever the cloud lifted from above the tent, the Israelites set out. Whenever the cloud settled, the Israelites set up camp. And you see that they had to be obedient to the leading of God, and that was learned in early days, shepherding God's or his father-in-law's flock in the desert. But then God spoke to him and used those 40 years, integrated that into his character to make him the leader that God was going to use mightily. Trust for being challenged, encouraged, and thank you for listening.